We're going to call this meeting to order. Do we have any comments about closed session? Seeing none, we'll adjourn to closed session.
No, we're gonna do the workshop first.
Oh, we are?
Yeah, so this is just an opening of a
Yeah.
board workshop,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
and then we'll do all that
But
stuff.
say it again because he's gonna.
Yeah.
Just say,
We're gonna open.
we're going to open the meeting and open the board workshop?
Yep.
Yes,
I've not done that. Are we, what do we do for a board workshop?
just,
Just more of dialogue,
Oh,
less
okay,
formality. Yeah.
okay,
And anybody in the public can participate in it.
okay.
Yeah.
So we'll open the board workshop.
Come on up. You are the board workshop.
I am.
Yes.
What are you guys doing tonight?
good, how are you?
Doing well.
Good, we're happy that you could be
Thank you
here.
for
It
coming.
says board workshop.
Yep,
It does.
Yeah.
says
I
board
am the
workshop.
This
here
is
too.
new to me,
You
so.
are the board workshop.
I'm the culprit for asking for the workshop because I like things to be more collaborative.
Yes, that's great,
Perfect. We love it.
yes.
Let me just kick. Well, good evening, everyone. Derek Obrecht with JK Architecture and Engineering. Glad to be back here tonight to give you an update on the progress of our library vision plan, and more importantly, seek some direction and feedback from you guys.
Perfect,
I got a message from Roxanne yesterday, and she was just not feeling well. So I did text her today, and she's on the mend, so that's a good thing. She said, run with it, go with it.
Good.
Keep the progress going. So let's see. What I wanted to do today, our goals for today essentially is I want to give you kind of a quick update on where we are in our visioning process with the library steering committee. Talk really about kind of understanding of the demographics of the city of Dixon, of the library service area, and kind of where that means from a library planning standpoint of what we should be aiming at, to essentially just right-size our library for where we are today, and also to think about potential growth looking forward. From there, we have some high-level planning, organizational strategies that we want to kind of get your feedback and help guide us from a direction standpoint of where we can kind of take our efforts moving forward. So that is our goal for today. Please keep this conversational. So the development of our library master plan essentially has been the notion of thinking about the essence of a process that we call imagine, design, and create. Through the imagine phase, we focus on understanding the big picture vision and understanding the goals and needs of both the community and the library proper itself. Under design, we want to understand our existing conditions, understand the constraints and the opportunities of the existing library, and opportunities for expansion. And essentially under create, we want to establish our long-range roadmap as to where this library vision plan wants to take us. Where are we in the process right now? Essentially, and like all planning processes, they kind of move at their own pace. In this one, we've been very diligent to kind of want to move slowly, partly from the standpoint that we also don't want to get ahead of anybody, and especially ahead of the board. And that was why when we had last met, Roxanne has met in October, Roxanne had made a suggestion that says, you know what, maybe we need to get back to the board and just kind of do a check-in. So that's where that check-in is here now, and once we get some confirmation, we'll be back and running. Talking with the library, what we began to kind of understand was the importance of understanding the vision, and the vision of the community and what the library means for the community. And what we understood was the importance of honoring the past. The Carnegie Library building itself, obviously, is a historical building for this community, and not something we want to lose sight of. We want to celebrate the present and the tremendous amount of partnerships and activities that happen on the library, in the park, and in the downtown businesses. We also understood the importance of planning for the future and the importance of looking at services and the types of facilities that are going to thwart our ability to grow as the community grows. From a goal standpoint, what we understood from our committee was the importance of maintaining the Carnegie Library building, the importance of maximizing efficiency and beautifying the existing interior of the facility, the importance of expanding spaces for public meeting rooms and study rooms, the importance of improving our tech services and access to technology, and the ability to expand space for library support services and offices. So those were the key takeaways as we stopped to kind of understand and listen to the members of our steering committee and those that use the library and said, okay, how do you look at things based on where you are now and what's working and not working? Before we start talking about where we could go, let's understand the present. So those were kind of the vision and goals that we heard. From there, we said, well, let's stop. Let's kind of take ourselves out of our traditional kind of comfort zone. And let's step back and say, what are libraries? Spend some time sharing with the committee some research that we've done with the Center for Future of Libraries. And what's interesting, when you think about the essence of a library, and you look at the types of activities and programs and services that are identified in this chart, there's not one circle that says book. And it's interesting to think about that, because libraries are changing. Books aren't going away, but libraries are changing. We see libraries becoming a much stronger community hub, which, no surprise, our library downtown here is. We also see the notion that there's a lot of participatory collections, some of which even come through the partnerships like Dixon Library has now with Solano County, and that opportunity of kind of expanding our services and footprint, such that we don't have to retain everything, but it's that community of resources that help us to kind of expand and spread our wings. We see tremendous partnership, and obviously I don't have to talk to you guys about schools because that's your other hat you wear, and the importance of 21st century learning and how libraries can become that resource to support sometimes those programs that may not exist on a campus but can exist in a central community spot. Importance of understanding digital services, and recognizing that we have everything from digital natives to digital immigrants, and that whole spectrum of how that support technology needs to happen. Effective operations really is not a trend. That's the foundation of any good library, as well as the reality of sustainability. Because if we aren't balanced in our understanding of our staffing and our operations, then obviously it's tough for a library to be vital in a community. So those are the items that we looked at relative to kind of understanding our concepts and trends. So as we understand our vision, we understand the goals. These are some of the trends within libraries that we see that we wanted to kind of take into consideration. From there, we kind of paused. Before, we were kind of looking at the library from the inside out. We wanted to come back and say, let's look at it from a community perspective. Let's look at it from the outside in. What are our demographics? What are our influences, and who are we trying to serve? As of right now, within 2018, city of Dixon has about a little under 20,000, population of a little under 20,000. But the service area is outside of the city lines, roughly about 25,000 people. When you look at that number and you look at how we plan libraries, it's an equivalent of about 0.75 per person that establishes a square foot. So if we look at our needs for 2018, it essentially says that our library should be at a 18,750 square foot facility. And we use 0.75 because it ranges for main branches from 0.5 to 1. So we just said, let's take the medium. Let's not take the high, let's not take the low, let's take something in between. Well, our existing library right now of usable space, not the basement below the Carnegie, but of usable space is 6,000 square feet. So this was kind of a good affirmation to kind of hear what we were hearing from the steering committee of kind of where they're struggling with space to be able to support their programs and provide space for their resources. And then we said, okay, well, that just gets us the right size for today. What do we see as projections based on a community influence? And based on the data that we were able to identify, through 2025, it's about a 25% increase in population. So it moves our population from a service area standpoint from 25,000 to 31,000, which with that same multiplier increases our library to 23,000 square feet, which essentially would be almost well, 23,000 above our total. So 17,000 from where we currently sit today. So that began to kind of establish some bookends for us. The bookend says if we can just right-size ourselves for today, we should be looking something around 18,000 square feet. If we want to think about the essence of planning for the future, the other end of that bookend would be the 23,000 square foot number. So those are two of the pieces that become foundational in our planning effort, is establishing what are our targets. Any questions on that slide before I move forward? Because this one's going to begin to kind of inform some of our subsequent slides.
So the 0.75, I understand you said you're taking a middle ground between 0.5 and 1, but is that number, from what this presentation says, that's kind of what libraries are using, but that's not a recommended square footage number through the California State Library System or something? It's just kind of a survey of what other places have done?
Actually, no. Based on the 2000 California Bond Library Program, those were the figures that were used as part of that program. So that's the best available data that we can use for a main library, is that 0.5 to 1 square feet per capita.
And what was could you remind us that it said the basement that is not calculated in, what was the square footage of the basement if that was somehow made usable?
I don't think it can be made usable besides storing books. Have you been down there?
Yeah, it's bad, I know, but I'm just curious how many square feet it is.
It's about 2,400.
Okay, thank you.
We have that labeled on some of the subsequent slide.
Yeah,
Because that has been conversations, is how do you take what we currently have and actually make it more usable before you look at expanding.
yeah,
So
okay,
that's definitely an area that we're looking at.
thank you.
So from there, in our second meeting with the steering committee, we came back and said, okay, we understand the vision, we understand the goals. Let's come and understand truly what our needs are. So we spent time kind of understanding that each of the areas that are within a library, and obviously we're going to have a dedicated children's area. So we began to kind of understand what are the aspects that need to go into the children's area. Of looking at the notion of space for story time and crafts and play, ability of having some seating, some areas for students to kind of, or kids to kind of read. Obviously, small group spaces in children's area are better than larger. And also understanding some of the support components as to places for OPAC machines and research, service information desk, and understanding kind of just the quantity of books. So we're trying to, here in this exercise, we're starting to kind of understand the parts and pieces that go in. From there, we spent some time thinking about the teen space. Once again, this is a work in progress, so there are some items to be determined. Because part of the conversation that we've been having with the committee is, well, how many books do you currently have? But the question is, well, how many should I have? So a few of these areas, when we start looking at the quantity of books, we're beginning to kind of understand, well, where's that sweet spot? Because we know we need some growth. We need a little more flexibility in our collections. So they're helping us to kind of get their arms around the quantity of books. But with the teen space, obviously, as we all know, teens need their own dedicated space, because if not, we're not going to get them to the library. They need to be visually close, but then they need to feel that they have that separation. So thinking about areas that the West Sac Library was an example that was brought up, that has a nice kind of diner, cafe, the Starbucks feel, the media bars, ability for people to kind of plug in their computers, kind of foundational from a teen area space.
When I don't know, my daughter never went to the library to study, just because I just don't think our library has enough space for that kind of stuff. Although it's much quieter than would be at my house, but I think if we provide them a space, I think that and we promote it, I think that they would use it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Very good point. On the adult space side, almost similar to the teens and kids, that they want their own dedicated space and they don't want to be commingling with anyone else either. And the ability of thinking about spaces that are really more suited from an adult standpoint, and much more quieter areas, smaller group activities. Also begin to kind of talk about what's obviously unique with the Carnegie and celebrating the history in the past, and obviously doing those types of amenities and within the adult area make a lot more sense because there's a lot more appreciation for celebrating of kind of the history. And once again, they're also helping us get their arms around the quantity of books in there. Support spaces, I think that's probably one of the areas that the library is doing a phenomenal job on, but is struggling because there's not a whole lot of support spaces. So we always like to look at really right-sizing the support spaces for the library to support those activities. Some of those support spaces kind of happen behind doors. Some of them happen kind of in the public area. And finding that right balance of also understanding how does the library function today, what's the quantity of staff, what are the appropriate spaces for them. Had a lot of conversation about even just getting our arms around how many enclosed offices do we need versus how many more open workstations, and finding that right balance, particularly because it all drives square footage. So we want to make sure that we're maximizing the square footage for the support services and obviously placing the most square footage that we can within the public areas of the library. Also begin to kind of understand some of the avenues of book drop-off and some of the things that can help improve operations over time as well. Really thinking about the essence that the library can still be used after hours with dropping off books and areas for deliveries and such. Community shared spaces were also talked about. I think the comment about we need a little more space. And what's interesting about the essence of community spaces is it's finding that right balance of not building one space that you use twice a year versus thinking about where you're going to use more often. And also thinking about where there makes sense to have flexibility within those spaces, dividing walls and such, that maybe you can kind of push and pull a little bit. But we began to identify the importance of study and meeting rooms, did acknowledge the notion of a community events room. And one of the things that we've mentioned to the committee, because we've done a lot of libraries in this area, and Winter's Library was one of them. So the committee's had time in between our workshops to go and tour those facilities and say, I like this and I don't like this. And so that's important because it's nice to kind of take yourself out of how you currently operate, go into something else, and then have a fresh perspective as to what's working and not working. And that helps to really influence and inform our ability to get that framework established. And lastly, we really begin to kind of understand some of those key items relative to the planning of the library that we don't want to forget about, and the importance of just creating places that are comfortable, that are exciting, that support indoor-outdoor connection, and recognize that libraries are also not only about kind of learning and growing, but they are about socialization. They're about connections within the community. So from there, once we kind of understood, once again, the vision and goals, understood the needs, and we understood those bookends of our demographic analysis, those square foot targets, we kind of came in and said, what are some strategies that we could be exploring? Recognizing that I'm going to share 3 strategies. These strategies really have not been developed because part of what we wanted to do is we wanted to stop and pause, identify some strategies, get some feedback and input, and then come back after and say, okay, how do we fit all this stuff into these series of boxes? Particularly because what I heard from the committee, what I've heard from you, what I've heard from Roxanne, is that we want to have options to phase. We need flexibility, which I fully understand for operations, for fiscal stewardship, for so many reasons. And that's why it's really imperative as you start thinking about the planning, transformation, and expansion of a library, that we keep that in mind, because we can very easily design ourselves into a box where all of a sudden we've lost that flexibility to achieve what we're trying to achieve. So our 3 schemes we're going to talk about a compact center infill as scheme 1, or strategy 1. Strategy 2, we're going to talk about embracing the corner.
Does that mean taking out, because the parts in blue here are currently businesses?
So we're going to talk about that one.
Okay, well, I
Yes.
just wondered.
Absolutely, great question. And strategy 3 about the concept that we called expanding the park. So we're going to share with you the 3 concepts, and then I'll share with you what we heard as a recommendation from the committee, And that's where I'm going to want to have some good dialogue.
Okay.
Within that, we also have some high-level planning cost assumptions within this. This is a crazy market. So even these numbers that I put here, we put down here 2 months ago to now, I'm kind of like, ooh, where's that market? But my gut hopes is that we hit our peak soon and we start to kind of level out. But at least from a standpoint, orders of magnitude across all schemes, because I think it's important to kind of validate that as part of our benchmark. So strategy 1, the compact center infill site. So our first preconception actually when we came to the library was it would be so cool if we could figure out a way to just kind of like expand internally right around that tree and have all these connections, indoor, outdoor connections. We looked at that, and our pro here, compact development, still have the ability to expand towards the corner, still have the ability to expand towards the east. And on the con side, we obviously, for that expansion to happen, we obviously need to begin to kind of understand what we're getting into, getting down to the basement of the Carnegie and potentially undermining the other portion of the library. So there's some costs there associated to that. This would be a multi-level. So one of the other cons is it starts to create some challenges from an access standpoint, which may be ideal for teens who want to get away, but adults kind of want easy in, easy out. This one also had really no ability to phase, because once again, as you kind of come in and plan something compact tied to our existing library, it kind of pins us in. The other piece we did realize is that it actually limited our square footage. So this scheme here did not give us the ability to afford even getting right size for 2018. From a planning standpoint, we began to kind of look at some cost figures as it relates to renovation and transformation and new construction on this scheme here, looking at the ability of taking over the basement, looking at improvements to the main level and the upper level, once again, some of which exist within our existing facilities, some of which would be new construction. That essentially defined a $8 million total project cost for this scheme. Once again, this is kind of all in. Other schemes you can see, it'll be all in, but you can kind of piecemeal some of it too. At that point, I kind of paused and said, okay, well, let's take a step back and say, okay, what would a new library cost? Because whenever we go through renovations and major transformations, you always want to put in context, how much money are we putting into something we already have that starts to spend more than what we really are getting for value? So our baseline, and once again, this is essentially would be an undersized program of a library. So the equitableness of a 14,000 square foot transformation versus a 14,000 square foot new library, assuming a new site, as a comparison, would be the difference between an $8 million and a $13 million cost. So there it begins to kind of show there's still a lot of value that we're getting. So there's no recommendation here to be demoing anything, especially the Carnegie. But there's the notion that there is good value within our existing infrastructure. Strategy 2 was kind of our second preconception, which is we've got the Carnegie sitting on B Street. We've got the other entrance to the library sitting on First.
13th. 13th.
It's like the corners, it's right there. Everything happens in the corner. What can we do to embrace that corner? Part of the studies that were done in the past, we did receive the structural analysis reports for the building on the corner. There's just a lot of red flags. And that's kind of one of those where the comparison before about what do you keep versus demo, that one's kind of starting to kind of look like the money pit to me. But from a site standpoint, from a community standpoint, that corner is just so phenomenal. So we looked at it and said, well, what if our pro is in this scheme here, our ability to revitalize that downtown street corner? Mm-hmm. The ability to kind of get that new image right on the corner, and link our two existing kind of library buildings. Central core addition could tie ourselves through, as well as there's still some ability for some future expansion. A little bit of phasing capability. This one starts to get a little tough because we do have some utilities and infrastructure that are servicing the library that are tied to the back of that building. So untangling that is doable, but there's definitely disruptions as it relates to that. Particularly, and also from the notion that you could build the corner and then build the addition out back. Those are pieces to be phased. This one does require a lot line adjustment, but I don't see that being an issue. Obviously demolition is required, so you've got some costs behind that. There may be some community voices behind that as well. And as I mentioned before, the utility interruptions is just something that just, I mean, any renovation on existing sites is going to have some level of disruptions. This is definitely a flag at a planning level. So as we looked at that one, this one does allow us the ability in this first phase with both additions to achieve our program needs for 2018. It, through transformation and additions, looks at a cost of about $11 million, and its comparable would be 16, based on the notion of a new library. So once again, still validating the value that our existing facilities have. The third scheme was a strategy which we refer to as kind of expanding the park and the ability of growing east. This one here has unique opportunity of kind of linking the parcel in that expansion with the park, and the ability for the park to essentially go around the library. It obviously has an ability of an expanded new image. Phasing is definitely an option here because there's parts and pieces that can be built and maintained and operated. There's still obviously the ability for future expansion to the corner down the road if we really felt that we needed it. So that hasn't gone away. No demolition required. And also with the notion of going to the east, there is an ability of getting some on-site parking, which parking obviously is probably one of the biggest challenges for the library. So the notion of growing it, and we have to be cognizant of the ability to actually bring people there that have easy access to it in order to support that investment. There is a linear organization to this, which sometimes within libraries, depending on staffing levels, can be a bit of a challenge. I think knowing how the current library is staffed, it wouldn't be a challenge here because we already have good, robust staffing to help support the various areas within the library. This one here is, once again, also able to hit our 2018 square foot targets. Its total project cost, if built as one project, would be about $10 million, 10.7. And it's comparable at 15 million. Still shows that we have value. Now, obviously, any phasing activity is going to throw the cost model a little bit out because you just add time and adds escalation. But there's definitely flexibility in this scheme here. Any questions on these three strategies before I share the recommendation from the committee?
Well, I don't have a question, but the lot adjacent on A Street that's going to be a proposed, right now it's people park there, but they won't be parking there if that project goes forward. So,
The library owns all that property back there, though.
no, I'm talking about the one across from Bud's, right? This one, right here.
That's not in this diagram. That's a block down.
This is,
We're on B.
this is,
B
this,
Street, I
B Street.
got you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, all right,
First in B.
right.
so this is when you go, here's 113, and then here's Dixon Family Services right here.
In
Here's
back.
the bank,
Yeah,
and
across.
this is the back, yeah.
And it's not used for anything right now. It's just an empty.
Right.
Is
right.
it
Well-
3 parcels that we own back there?
I don't remember. But the
I
one
think
building
so.
down a ways.
Okay.
is-
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a small one and then two regular sized
Sized ones,
as I
okay.
recall. Yeah, small one maybe in the middle.
Okay.
So I'm going to share the committee's recommendations, which coincidentally expands to the east, and maybe my analogy is B Street becomes Book Street, based on the notion of an opportunity of a new front door. So the committee started looking at each one of these schemes, and what's always interesting when you share 2 or 3 options is that 4 or 5 end up resulting. That's why I never like to present more than 3, because then it starts to get difficult for figuring things out. But I think what was interesting in our conversation was that the notion of the park was a foundational component of the opportunity of those indoor-outdoor spaces and those community spaces, and the ability for that to kind of grow. Because there's not many parks that exist, and that helps establish that town center. The ability of creating a new image, the ability of creating a new entry. The library here can operate during parts of construction. So there's a nice phasing component that can happen within these parts and pieces. The ability for future expansion could still occur in the corner. So the item that are in yellow, essentially that new construction plus the improvements within the existing building would right-size our program for 2018. And there's still the ability to expand to the corner to support future growth, as well as what I mentioned before about the on-site parking. The cons really haven't changed, but once again, I don't see those cons as really major flags from a planning standpoint.
I like kind of the symmetry around the Carnegie that way.
So would that
Kind of
become,
making it a center, that beautiful old center entrance there.
well, and would that become our entrance again?
So what's interesting about this is you think about the essence of a library, which is you've got an area for children, you've got an area for teens, you've got an area for adults, and you've got community spaces. Once again, we haven't gotten into this, but I'm always thinking ahead. There's an ability to have potentially multiple front doors from a standpoint of access during the day, access after hours, and the ability to isolate. So it is interesting as to where would the front door want to be. I think the notion of celebrating the Carnegie by pulling off the addition is something that kind of just pays tribute and respect to that. Initially before, it's like, oh, you're gonna want to come into the new entry of the new building. Well, maybe you want to enter in between, and something that kind of celebrates that essence of the old and the new. Once again, there is no interior design. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, depending on how we want to kind of celebrate that. Obviously, the biggest challenge in the Carnegie is the notion of the grade change and the elevation. So what's our feeling about increasing stairs and ramps to kind of create that front door expression? And does that start to take away from the Carnegie? Kind of where my gut would feel. It's still that ceremonial entry, but as long as the new entry is just beside it, I think that can still help. This right here, once again, the same kind of total project costs of looking at about $10 million for that phase 1 within those square footages. And essentially, this next slide here is essentially the recommendation, which is to start thinking about the expansion in that direction. Thinking about the ability that as we start to plan and design this further, that we have potentially a phase 1A, phase 1B, phase 1C type of sequencing that could bring us through the library in a very logical standpoint.
And would all the buildings actually be connected?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
because
so-
currently the corner is not connected to the other buildings. Is that correct?
The Miller Building is
yeah,
not,
yeah,
it's not
okay.
connected.
So obviously the phase 2, that would be a future.
Yeah.
But as of right now, the whole notion would be the notion of kind of creating almost more of an interior street behind the Carnegie that links the new addition, the Carnegie, and the existing, what's labeled here as phase 1C. So there is clear access and line of sight and connections within this linear organization.
Okay.
And the two-story sort of I guess that's just how we're getting the square foot, because with the, well, not the Carnegie, with the addition to the Carnegie being one story, it just seems odd that we're gonna have a two-story behind it.
So let's see, so Phase 1C obviously would be the only single story. Carnegie, based on its volume, is creating a second story,
Right.
even though
Yeah,
the primary story is elevated. And adjacent it, we would have the two-story space in order to fulfill all the program requirements.
and so we'll just still have that low part in the front.
Yes. Yes. And one of the things that we're looking at is addressing our ADA access down to the basement of the Carnegie, but probably thinking about that to be more from a back-of-house support storage type spaces.
Wouldn't that need to be an elevator of some sort?
Yes, yeah. But the notion from a line of sight and visibility, it's probably not an area that's used for public. There may be a meeting room down there depending on how things shake out. But I think more of a controlled access, just from a line of sight and supervision standpoint.
And what are the kind of darker gold box rectangles on?
Yeah, those little boxes.
Those are just kind of diagramming where we would see stairs and elevator access, vertical circulation.
Okay.
We're obviously not looking at 3 elevators, but definitely from a vertical circulation standpoint to address easy access as well as egress.
So then you could get from 1B into 1C, at least on the lower floor.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the entry level would have access from 1A to the back of 1B and 1C. That would all be on the same level.
Okay.
And is there a way to change the facade of the current front of the main entrance to match the new construction, so we don't have 3 different buildings plus the Miller building? Essentially, that nothing matches. I mean, they're not only not the same height, but they don't match each other. I mean, that just seems like it's a lot of stuff shoved together on a corner, as far as I'm concerned.
So you referencing Phase 1C? That portion of the existing building? Because we're obviously not going to touch the Carnegie from a
Right, no,
historical
I don't want
standpoint.
you to touch the Carnegie. I'm just saying that, I never liked the way that the part looks that we have on there now. I don't think it matches the Carnegie. And so then we're gonna add something else that's also not gonna match Phase 1C or the Carnegie or the Miller Building. So, not that the Miller Building's attractive,
Right.
but none of it's gonna match. That just seems like a lot of stuff kind of tossed together, and we're calling it, kind of all the same building. Is there a way to make any of that, without messing with the Carnegie, is there a way to make any of that kind of match the rest of each other?
Yes, yeah, you could definitely look at the exterior elevation of the existing front door and improve it to kind of match the design direction of where Phase 1A wants to go. Yeah, absolutely.
So are you thinking Phase 1A would initially be more aesthetically like the Carnegie in its look, or or is that just still?
I think that's a question I'd want to kind of throw back to you guys.
Yeah.
We're not there. Obviously, as an architect, I've got an appreciation for the Carnegie. I don't think you ever want to replicate the past, because then you start taking it away. But what that wants to look like, I think that's one of the interesting kind of challenges and opportunities in this project.
But I
The notion
think,
is some distinctive architecture that, how do you kind of blend them together, yet recognize that they're different?
Yeah.
it seems like to me there's a way to tie in everything else and then the Carnegie can kind of go with it, right? Whether it's paint colors, whatever. But then all the more modern phases of the building all go, and then the Carnegie kind of stands out as a historical building.
That would be I think, the tendency of a design direction one ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the question to you and to the community would be, if the essence is we're trying to celebrate the past, the present, and the future, past is covered. It's the Carnegie. The question is what does our future look like? and how future and potentially modern and contemporary do we want to be? Because one of the neat aspects, and if you've traveled abroad, there's some great historical architecture next to some great contemporary architecture. And sometimes it's that dichotomy between the two. And you can still do so within a reasonable budget. I'm not saying we're going far extreme, but just in conversation, there is an ability to kind of have that juxtaposition that celebrates the old and the
Well,
past and the future.
in Paris, the Louvre Museum is an excellent example of, just shocking modern against this castle.
Exactly. I don't want to throw out examples because obviously we've got budget items here that we're sensitive to, but I think for conversation, that's a wonderful example. So that's kind of where we're sitting today. We wanted to get a check-in with you, kind of share with you the progress that the committee's been making, that we've been making, both kind of listening and leading and sharing. Our next step is to kind of identify a direction we want to go and start to kind of develop and test that. Test that within the square footage, test that within the program requirements and the goals we identified and I shared. And then essentially begin to kind of think about how that starts to kind of fold out into a vision plan. At that point, get another cost estimate that really starts to break each of these phases down so we can kind of understand the flexibility that we have. And then essentially establish the foundation of a vision plan that we can move forward with. Any thoughts, questions, affirmations on the committee's recommendation?
I'm glad they didn't choose one, the 3-story one. That was, I didn't care for that one. I like the symmetry of, like Luke says, the symmetry of the design more.
And I think it makes sense to keep the costs down by using that lot that we have there that nothing's being done with. I agree with the idea that's been presented. I think that it's nice and makes sense. My concerns are more financial.
Well, and I'm hoping that with this, we would convert one of those lots into a parking lot as we do this, because we do need parking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A safer place for people to park without, but cost. So,
And I think I'm mostly concerned about the way that it's going to look with all 4 of those buildings on that same lot. And the fact that right now they all look so different, and I don't think that looks good. And I think it's really going to take something special to pull them all together and make them look like a cohesive library, in addition to making them look attractive if we're trying to make this kind of a centerpiece in town.
Very valid point.
And not a dinosaur.
so it'd be interesting if you could show us like ideas. I mean, you had some examples of different libraries. It would be interesting if you had an aesthetic, to be able to look at something to see how this is done, if it can be done.
So as part of the vision plan, we're going to come back and obviously look at designing this from the inside out, but obviously we always need to look at things from the outside in. So we're going to share some, at a planning level, some concepts and strategies to kind of get some further input.
And then I was wondering, as far as funding, I mean, I know we have a little bit of money set aside for this, but certainly not,
But no, not that much.
not
For
even
sure.
close.
Nope.
So what are the steps to be able to get the money?
Parcel tax, bonds. Mm-hmm. You know the routine.
Yes. And I'm wondering, how often do, we have new development coming in. I don't know, have you ever heard of anyone partnering, being a partner with new developers and try to figure out, hey,
Wasn't that Twin Bridges Library? Didn't they get some from the new development there in Lincoln?
Yeah, so we actually did that library.
Yeah, I saw the picture of it. That's what made me think of it, yeah.
So that one actually was funded as part of the 2000 Library Bond Act.
Oh, that was in
So
the.
there was a, yes, I think it was a $10 million grant actually for that one.
Okay.
So there's probably not money available though, still for?
Not right now, no.
Okay.
I had probably need a little more understanding, but I know that there's some parcel tax money coming in from, was it the Solano County?
We have some, I think it's 40, you mean the overpayment from you mean the payment that went to Vacaville that should have gone to us?
No,
Oh.
there's was it a sales tax, a half-cent sales tax?
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
So there may be an
Quarter cent
opportunity,
sales tax, but yeah.
there may be an opportunity for leveraging that from a financing standpoint that could be explored.
Well, I would be interested in knowing options as far as, okay, so we have this, and yeah, we have some questions of how do you make it look right and all that. But really, the big question is how do we pay for this?
How do you make it real?
Uh-huh.
That's always the fun challenge and opportunity.
So, I think exploring different options.
Mhm.
Does your company help do that? Or are you just the, design?
Well, our focus is design,
Okay.
but the reality is amongst all of our planning, if we can't help find opportunities of funding strategies, then our planning doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah,
So we're going to definitely tap those connections.
okay.
And that's why I kind of shared that essence of that partial tax. Because I think there's something there that could be,
It's a quarter cent sales tax.
Sorry,
It's
sales
the-
tax.
It's the
Sorry,
county,
yes.
yeah, no, it's okay. It's the county as a whole passed a quarter cent sales tax. So we get a quarter cent for all the sales that happen here in Dixon. But currently, we do use that as part of our operating budget, so we have to sort of figure out how,
right. That's always the fun part.
how to shift that around.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
this is great.
So we'll probably back in a couple of months with an update. If not, Roxanne's probably going to give you updates sooner. And appreciate your time today, and
Yeah. thank
happy
you.
holidays.
Yes, happy holidays to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
John, you want to see if there's any
Hey.
public comment on our workshop?
Yes. Is there any public comment on our workshop?
Since I'm the only member of the public here, I guess I better come forward.
Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for this workshop. I share some of your concerns about financing this, and especially some of Ms. O'Halloran's concerns about having it more tied together. The current general plan and the upcoming general plan put a emphasis on historic preservation. And so to have it, and we have signs here, there, and everywhere welcoming people directing people to historic downtown Dixon. So I am concerned about having something that, and I think you share my concern, something probably too drastic in terms of contrast between the Carnegie and the new building, and more having it more historic looking. And so I had another question. Are we considering anything that jeopardizes the Carnegie's historic designation?
No, I don't think
Not,
we can.
not, okay. And I also share Ms. O'Halloran's concern about kind of dwarfing the Carnegie. So that wouldn't, to me, it wouldn't highlight it, it would detract very much from it. And then I understand that the Miller Building has some issues. I've been at the meetings where those have been discussed, but the impression I had from those previous meetings was that this was definitely a building that could be salvaged and incorporated in this plan, and I'm not really getting that impression tonight, so I'm a little confused by that. And again, I would like to stress that the city's emphasis in this general plan on historic preservation, if we eliminated the horrible additions to that Miller building, that terrible facade that is there now, and restored it to more of a historic look, if possible, I think there are members of the community very, very interested. They were in the past, and I think they are still interested in trying to utilize that building. And so I would hope that maybe that's a possibility. I think some money's already been spent on it, and to utilize it, I think would be appropriate in kind of restoring the historical aspects of the downtown. And I'm not sure its generation. It was a post office at one time, but I don't know how its generation compares with the Carnegie. But it's certainly more historical than most of our buildings downtown. Again, if we could get rid of the very obnoxious, as far as I'm concerned, but way that it has been presented for the community on that corner. So I think those are my major comments. So, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, anybody else? Any other public comments? You in the back, sir? No? You good? Okay. Okay, well, I will thank you for coming. And we'll go ahead and start the meeting. You didn't already open the meeting, did you?
Well,
Oh,
depends how you look at it. I accidentally did, but then I opened the workshop, so
We probably need to close the workshop.
probably, yeah, no, reopen the meeting.
Okay, I'm going to close the workshop. And I'm going to call the meeting to order. And we are going to go into closed session.
Are there any comments?
Oh, any public comments about closed session?
Okay.
Seeing none? Okay.
Thanks, you too.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays. Thanks again for coming.
Oh, turn the key.
Turn the key, Joe.
Bring this meeting to order. Ooh, hey, the bass voice. Announcements from closed session. The board took action by unanimous vote in closed session to reject the tort claim of Steve Arizona. Let's start our business meeting. Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody please stand. Okay. So we are going to, do I need to make a motion? Someone needs to make a motion to skip the oath of office, or we're just gonna?
I think we can
It's just
just
not required.
explain why we don't need to do it, just in case someone's watching it.
Yeah, on our agenda, it says that we were supposed to take the oath of office. We've already done that for our school board meeting, and none of us recall it being mandatory to do it for the library as well. So we're gonna not do it. Boom. Okay. Roll call. Everyone's present except our library director, interim library director. Public comment. Persons wishing to speak to an agenda item may raise their hand. Raise their hand. During public comment, the library board president will recognize you for the discussion. At the appropriate time, speakers will provide their names to the library board, after which the speaker will have 5 minutes to speak. Any public comments? No? You want to say something? Okay. Notice to the public, any member of the public wishing to address the governing board on a topic within the subject matter jurisdiction of the district and not on the agenda may do so during the public comment period identified in this agenda that I just said. Act upon by the board, except I said bylaw subjects not on the agenda cannot be acted upon by the board except to briefly respond, clarify, or refer to staff for review and presentation at a future meeting. We have no guests in presentation, no correspondence, and we have
Approval of the minutes.
consent agenda.
I'll make a motion.
Do we have any public comments on the consent agenda?
sorry.
Any board comments? Seeing none?
I'll make my motion.
I'll second.
All right. I have a motion, I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Jewel, was that an aye?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have to write it down. All right. So who made the motion?
Melissa?
I did.
Melissa.
This is being recorded, right?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm
Yes.
sure Roxanne will.
Yeah, I'm writing it down anyway.
Okay. Really?
I got you.
Clerk.
Okay, cool. It's like you're my secretary.
Okay. I did wrong too. Okay.
All right. Okay, we're going to move on to our action items.
Should we make a motion to table all information
Information
items
items.
Yes.
and discussion items 9 and 10? I'll make that motion.
Okay, I have
I
a
second.
motion and a second to table the information items. Do I have any public comments? Any board comments?
No.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, action items, our annual organizational meeting. Each year, the governing board shall hold an annual organizational meeting. In any year which regular election of library board members is conducted, the organizational meeting shall be held within a 15-day period beginning from the date upon which the library member elected at that election takes office. During the non-election years, the meeting shall be held within the same 15-day period on the calendar, and it's Ed Code 35143. So we are going to elect new officers.
I nominate Luke as president of library board.
I second.
Okay, I have a motion, I have a second. Do we have any public comment about Luke becoming the library president? Any board comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I will make a motion nominating Catlin as vice president.
Awesome. Okay, I have a motion nominating Catlin as vice president of the library. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Do I have any public comments? Board comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. And we need a clerk.
I will make a motion nominating Jewel as clerk.
I'll second.
May I ask what the clerk does?
And takes
It's a
notes when the
very
library
good
director's
question.
not here. No, signs important
You
documents.
sign things, basically, yeah.
You do clerk stuff.
So the president and the clerk oftentimes signs documents, and then you can take notes in closed session and take notes for the director.
I accept.
And you can call yourself Jewel Fink Clerk.
So
Okay.
I'll second that. Did I already second
I
that?
did.
Okay, you seconded it.
Okay, I have a motion and I have a second. Any public comments on Jewel Fink Clerk? Seeing none, any board comments?
Nope.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
All right.
congratulations, guys. Okay, moving on to replacement of the security gates. We have a bid for $33,703.84.
Oh, hold on, stop. Sorry, we have to do D first. That's an action item.
Which?
Oh, yeah.
The interim director's
correct-
contract.
Contract.
Okay.
And there's some actually,
We'll just skip those.
Okay,
Should we,
Let's skip those until we have more conversation about them. Oh, maybe the calendar?
oh, do we need to,
additional meeting,
We-
all of these are,
Yeah, but we
we're
should,
gonna, okay.
there is only second read. We can do it next time.
okay,
Okay.
yeah, so we'll,
But we do need to approve the director's, the interim
and
director's.
we can approve the calendar too, or no?
Well, it's in the packet,
Yeah.
Okay,
so we should.
yeah.
And then
we-
also, do we need to also approve C so the library can be closed for professional development?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
We'll
so,
we'll just do them all, yeah. Okay, so,